Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I had a couple listener comments and questions left in a number of my recent videos, and there was one particular listener, my buddy Derek. Check him out on Twitter at Dege13, DEGE13, and he left me a couple questions in regards to my Transformers collecting habits. So I thought I'd share my responses to you guys, and maybe you guys can spark a discussion with it as well. Maybe you might be able to relate to some of the things that I say too. His first question was, what makes you want to buy a Transformer? Now, I wrote down a number of responses to this. The first point being really just comes down to nostalgia. It was the first real toy and cartoon series that I remember getting into. You gotta remember, Transformers came out in 84 to 87. So prior to that, it was, aside from the kiddie cartoons that I watched as growing up, the real only other, I guess, adult sort of based cartoons prior to that I can think of off the top of my head would have been the D&D series. Smurfs wasn't. That came out in 83. He-Man came out in 83. And the D&D was 83. But we didn't get TF until 84. And then some of the other series like Robotech was 85. Thundercats was 85. Voltron was, what did I write for that? 84. So prior to that, I just remember being mesmerized when it first came on TV, and the fact that how cool it was, these vehicles that we saw in everyday life could suddenly transform. And that goes into my second point, where it was sort of like the first real big boy toy that I had, or that I remember playing with as a kid. Prior to that, as a boy, you were either playing outside or playing with Matchbox cars or, Tonka trucks or stuff like that. And then we suddenly were able to have lifelike vehicles that could actually transform, and they were made out of metal again, and it was a truck, and they were used to playing with it or something similar to this, in a non-transforming vehicle form, and suddenly you got this where you could change it into a complete robot and have a completely different experience with it. So for me, that really sparked my imagination, because up until then, there was nothing like that, at least that I had ever played with, and it was just completely something new and out of the blue. Another thing that makes me want to buy a Transformer is if I see a good review on YouTube. Now, I remember there was a YouTuber, there still is a YouTuber that I watch consistently, but he was one of the earlier ones that I had found. You can find him obviously on YouTube under the name The Collector75. It's my buddy Graham, who lives out in England. And I remember distinctly, it was one of his reviews of G2 Megatron. Now, G2 Megs is a big fat green tank, and I'd have mine here, except he's stored up in my closet. You can check out one of my videos to see what that one looks like. But for me, Megatron was always a gun. And for me, the only real Megatron is the Walther PPK gun. And suddenly he had done this review on Megs as a tank. And I guess his passion and how much he enjoyed the figure sort of translated through on me. And that was a convincing factor for me to want to go out and actually pick up something that I never even would have considered prior to seeing, if not his review, maybe someone else's review who liked it equally. Sometimes I'm going to buy a figure based upon maybe how I read about him in a comics, like say in the recent, or few years past anyway, but a number of the IDW comics, I hated Hot Rod. And I think a lot of people hated him because of the 84 movie and how he took over Prime's role, but his run in the IDW comics, at least within the last 3 or 4 years, has really made me like his character. Or I could just pick up a figure based on basically their name alone. Like for example, I brought this here. This is D. Hold it up right. So this is the D011 Baldigus, or also might be known as Ruination, based on the name alone that I found on, just doing research online. The name Baldigus was completely out of the park for me. Never heard anything like it before. It just sounded super cool. Or the name Ruination. Essentially, they're both the same figure. That name alone just made me want to go and pick it up. So even strange things like that, or there's even the E-Hobby Overcharge. It's just split swing, different color, but the name Overcharge sounds pretty badass, so that was one of the figures I picked up. Another thing that makes me want to buy Transformers, or certain Transformers, is if there's redecos or like new design improvements on it. Probably redecos are the most common, since they just use the same existing mold and just recolor it. So a good example of that is the Dimension Explorer set. I'll put a link up for that because I did a review on that recently, or not recently, but a little while ago. So essentially it's just the mini bots that we're accustomed to, like Bumblebee, Power Glide, Huffer, Cosmos, and they're just recolors. Colors that we're not accustomed to seeing them, that we've seen for X amount of years since they first appeared in the '84 series. And essentially it's just the same figures, but in this great new coloring that makes them pop even better and gives them a fresh new appearance. So that was my reason for picking this setup, for no other reason than that. I'm not crazy about the mini bots, but these guys just look so different and fresh from their old figures and old colors that I went ahead and just grabbed this set off one of my collector friends. And finally, one last thing that I really look for when I'm looking to buy Transformers is I really appreciate good artwork, and for me that can sometimes sway me to pick something up if the item itself or the figure is not I guess 100% to my liking. That's not the case with these guys. These were picked up, one, just for their, well, really just for their packaging alone. These are the Takara book style figures, but you can see, they've got the excellent IDW artwork on the front with either Mags or like Optimus here. So you can't really go wrong with these guys. Like, I'm sure everybody in their collections have tons of Optimus Primes, or a couple Megatrons maybe, but I just couldn't pass it up to have another one with such nice artwork as this. So it's definitely a factor that I like to consider when I'm picking up my figures. Okay, moving on to Derek's second question is, what do they need to do to get you to buy Transformers? Well, I'll start off with one point. It's not a deal breaker, but it's certainly something that is a bonus if it is, and that's a satisfying transformation. Now, this guy is an example, G1 Jetfire. For those of you familiar with them, it's a rather large figure, but at the same time it's not overly complex. But it's definitely not simplified. Like, it's satisfying in terms of the joints being ratchety. You hear a lot of clicking. It's pretty straightforward, where you don't even really need to have the manual that much. Especially if you're not accustomed to them, you can sort of figure it out. Whereas I know there's other figures, like say take the original Masterpiece Megatron. Not only was it super fragile, the transformation of it was, you'd almost have to be like a scientist to figure it out. It was that complex, where it would take people, because of its fragileness and complexity, it could take you at least half an hour to sort of transform it, whereas there's no enjoyment in a figure for that. Whereas these guys here, like some of the simpler G1s, they were to a point where, you know, you could do it like in a minute and enjoy it and be satisfied that you got your money's worth out of the whole figure. Another thing I look for is quality of design when it comes to the new figures. I don't want to see a lot of hollowness. I pulled this guy out as an example, the Power of the Primes Grimlock. I think they've done a good job with this design. It's very, very similar to what the G1, show you in the back there, what it would look like. Another complaint in regards to these new figures, that's a big turnoff for me, that doesn't make me buy them sometimes, is when you see a lot of hollowness. I don't know if you can see in the picture, but his legs, hollowness tends to occur within the inside of the legs or within the inside of the forearms for a lot of these figures. And his insides are just sealed off with, plastic. Whereas with some figures, just to save production and costs, I guess, they'll just leave it hollowed out. So that's a real turn-off for me, and it can be definitely a deciding factor in terms of me not picking up the figure. Good QC on the figures is another factor. Sometimes you see YouTube reviews and just straight out of the factory, these figures, especially when you get up there in the dollars, paint job is poor, the transformation process, joints or panels aren't clicking together properly. Like I know, we'll use some Autobot vehicles, MP Wheeljack. Now I know a lot of people are satisfied with this guy, and I just picked him out as an example. Good QC. People weren't finding issues with it in terms of paint chips or, just paint overlapping areas where it shouldn't be. Whereas I know with some of the later Masterpiece Autobot vehicles, at least with the later MP vehicles, there was a lot of QC issues. I know paint jobs weren't spectacular, and people were complaining about the joints and lack of paneling closing off properly and not having floppiness. So for me, when I see a review on figures like that, especially at the price point that you're paying for these Masterpiece vehicles, $79, $89, you expect to get a little bit of quality for your money. If you want me to buy a figure nowadays, I really prefer to have it some sort of weight or heaviness to it. I know with the recent Masterpiece or G1 reissues, like in Walmart, they could have easily gone and cheaped out on these guys, but they didn't. Like, there is pretty much, from what I can tell, very similar in terms of weight and density compared to the G1 originals, and for me that's important. Like, that Prime was $69, Starscream was $49, and when you're paying that money, like $49 is pretty decent, but to pay $69, and that's Canadian, for this guy here is outrageous. So if I'm going to pay that money, I want to see and feel a little bit of quality to it. They could have easily chimped out and really cut back on what metal there is on this figure and still charge the same price. And for me, that's just not good business. These are real sour tastes in your mouth, and definitely dissuades you from wanting to purchase any of the future G1 reissues that they've done. I just touched on that as well. Price point is definitely a deciding factor. So, like I said, $69, not worth it. The only reason I grabbed it was because it's the first Prime that came without a trailer, and Yeah, they're still around. I didn't want to go through the hassle of having to find one later when the price drops. So I got it when I first saw it, and I'm happy that I have it. I would have preferred a lower price point, like say $49, even $59. Shave 10 bucks off for what you're getting. But even the new Siege figures that they have out there, like the Siege Shockwave, that's $69, and it's a small figure. And it, like, I don't think it even weighs as much as a Starscream or whatever. But you know, you're paying 70 bucks plus tax for a figure roughly that size. It's, for me, it's not worth it for these newer figures. So that's it. I really appreciate you asking me those couple questions, Derek. If anyone else feels free and would like to leave some questions or comments, leave it below. I'll gladly answer them, obviously, and maybe I can put them into use into a video and give you a little bit of credit for it. But thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate all the support you guys have done for the channel. And if there's any future questions, feel free to leave them below. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you guys in another video.